Hey everyone's Classic DM. It's been a while, and while everyone's been working through COVID-19, I've been kind of digging into an old classic science fiction RPG that I've been in love with for so long. You probably heard me mention it in many, many videos. I thought it'd be really fun to put together a series kind of casually that kind of dives into the rules of classic Traveler and focuses primarily on combat because there's an element to how combat is handled in Traveler that is very different but also extremely ahead of its time. And in this video we'll go through exactly how the combat system works, primarily firearm combat and melee combat, and we'll talk about a very subtle tiny little thing you can do to that rule set to really bring it alive, that will not shy too far away from your existing sensibilities from Pathfinder or from D&D or any other RPG that you play. So before we get started, one thing I want to make sure is really clear. This is kind of a long video. I will put timestamps in here. I've also on my Patreon page included these slides. So if you want a copy of these slides as a PDF, you can download them for free. You may need a Patreon account, but the posting will be public. I will also share some pictures and things like that on Facebook. So you can go check that out if you want to. My goal for this part of the year is to expand some of the content into Traveler for a little bit. To reveal some of the magic. This game's been out for over 43 years now, and that's what this video is going to cover. So let's dig into the main topic today, which is going to be combat. So before we really dive into the combat itself, we have to kind of go back in time and let some people know, like, what is this game? Is this a new game you're designing? Or no. This is a game that was designed by Mark Miller and some other folks at a company called Game Designers Workshop. This video kind of looks at all the combat systems and how the system works, the time frame that was developed, some of the really great things about it, some things that don't seem great when you first read it. It's very difficult to kind of glean out what happens, how the game system is going to work. And I put some time and energy into really kind of pulling out all that complexity and gathering it here into something that's really straightforward and clean that you might be able to digest as a modern gamer. Modern day RPG books like D&D and Pathfinder are really clean, really well written. They have lots of editors. They have beautiful concept art, beautiful pictures. Things are broken down really clean. And when Traveler first came out, it was very low budget, saddle stitched little black books. So, there's an unrecognized brilliance. There's many brilliant streamlined design decisions in Traveler that a lot of other games never really seem to have understand or taken advantage of. I feel that part of the problem with that is the game's lack of popularity over the last 40 years is because of its inexpensive publishing format. It is at the same time, a lot of people love the idea that these things are released as little black books. You may hear old school guys and gamers say that, oh, I love the little black books and blah, 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 blah. So that what they're talking about is the small, like trade paperback size little booklets, like 44-page booklets with like 3 staples holding the binding together that you could probably slip inside your book bag as a kid. And it wasn't a big, heavy hardback book printed in China with, 17 different concept artists in it. They would have little black and white sketchy style artwork in it that was low production value. The doesn't mean that the design is bad. It just, when you first look at it, it has this kind of odd, clean Helvetica Optima publishing kind of military touch to it. It doesn't really leap off the page as a magnificent world with hundreds of thousands of worlds and adventures that really tap into all kinds of conflicts and plots and ideas, where you can have starships and explore any planet and replicate any science fiction film or book you've ever played with any time of time frame or epoch, technology level. You can recreate anything. It's really, really amazing. It even has psionics. It has multiple starfaring races, an incredibly deep and robust history. It's really, really huge. And it's probably the largest singular focused campaign setting of any RPG ever created. Because we all know in AD&D you had Greyhawk, and then you have Faerun, or however you want to pronounce it, and then, oh gosh, what was that one they did at the late end of 3rd edition? I forgot it. And then you have this Eberron, that's what it was. And then you have the whole Neverwinter thing, and they're revisiting it again. So in Traveler, they've always just had one universe. And they've had some key places like the Spinward Marches, like you see here on the right, with these big hex grids and all these jump routes and the names of these star systems. A very EVE Online kind of vibe, way before EVE Online was even around. So because of that, and the fact that its initial impression was that if you were a hardcore war gamer, a hardcore or RPG player, and you'd gotten like original D&D, this was just as cool, if not cooler, than the original D&D. But once D&D started going down the route of having color hardback books with lots of sketches and tie-ins to mythology and Elric and Melonbone and Conan and all these other types of things, suddenly D&D got really popular and was much more relatable. So a lot of people weren't really into hard science fiction, even though it had been around for so long, especially during the space race in the United States and across the world against Russia. So the lack of the game crossing over into other realms of entertainment is another thing that kind of hurt it. They never really made very many computer games. They made a couple, and we all remember even D&D making things like The Curse of the Azor Bonds or on the Apple, or even like the Eye of the Beholder, or some of these old games like Wizardry Surtech. These fantasy games, even Zork Nemesis and stuff, the Traveler, they made like one or two games, and that was it. They never went back and said, hey, let's make a proper 3D game. Let's make a Baldur's Gate. Let's make an Icewind Dale. They never did that. They missed out on opportunity on that. I remember talking to Mark Miller on the phone way back after I'd left Cyan about how the great opportunity would be to make a game like Traveler and basically duplicate what was being done in the first Neverwinter. It was an exciting idea, but we couldn't find any funding. The Xbox folks wanted to do Xbox Live side-scrollers at the time, so it was very hard to get anyone. We wanted to license the engine from the BioWare guys and all that kind of stuff. And it was just early days of pipe dreaming in my game industry career, and I thought it would have been a wonderful thing to do. But, it would have taken a lot of time, energy, and money to pull it off properly. So, it never really got the widespread appeal because it wasn't hammering on all this merchandising from Spaceballs. It wasn't hammering on increasing its production value. It was recreating editions with the same kind of epoch and just changing the history. And this isn't a complaint. It's just the way that it was. It doesn't take away from how strong the game system is. The game system itself is very cool, extremely compelling. It's one of those game systems that you always keep coming back to. It's like a Led Zeppelin album. I mean, it really is that classic. Now, when Traveler 5 came out in 2014, called T5, suddenly this is a $90 huge phone book of rules that Mark probably spent over 10 years working on. And it just became a dictionary-sized version from, it's like a collegiate Webster, Merriam-Webster dictionary. It had a tendency to just be full of table after table after table of world builder, gun builder, armor builder, ship builder, all these kinds of things, because their idea with their game system was to empower a game master or a referee to generate everything that they could ever come up with, as opposed to providing you all those details that you needed to take and just run with it and put your personal twist a little bit on it. Now, there was plenty of adventures, plenty of modules. Judges Guild, FASA, and even the guys at Games Designer Workshop, they did tons of adventures. So the other element that really hurt this game's longevity and popularity, and it's not dead, there's still a large community of people that play this stuff, and is it had this comical, dying character creation thing, and everyone jokes around about that, even to this day. Even when the earliest reviews in Dragon Magazine and after the some of the trade shows that they went to was that, hey, when 1001 patrons came out, 1001 characters came out, everyone's like, oh, this is great. I don't have to have a character that dies during character creation. And we'll do another video that explains how you can create a character in the game the old school rules as written way. And I also propose a way to do characters that feels more modern. But your character could actually die, and that was primarily driven by the fact that in that game, which is very militaristic oriented, you join a branch of armed services, whether it's like the Army or the Navy or Marines or something, or Scouts, and you get a bunch of skills and re-enlist after 4 years, and you gain these skills, you get promoted, and you muster out of a military with a bunch of money and maybe a ship and a bunch of skills, and you're 40 years old. So that was a new take on character creation. It's funny because in the modern day we see how Pathfinder 2nd Edition has had some of those ideas, but not quite as hardcore. And in all the other RPGs and fantasy games, you still start off with this level 1 chump with this really interesting backstory, right? And you're supposed to start at level 1 and take it from there. So Traveler, you're playing characters there like Sean Connery in Outland, or some of the Marines in Aliens 2, or Ripley, or even Luke Skywalker, or Darth Vader, or anyone else you can think of. So you already are an established heroic character. You're not an 18-year-old from The Princess Bride. So because of that die during character creation element, a lot of people are like, I don't want to play a game where like I'm rolling my character up for 45 minutes to an hour, and then the random number generator, the 2 dice throws, kills my character. That's why, in my opinion, the dice are always better served in combat and action when there's moments of conflict and tension, as opposed to during character creation. And you see this in Paizo's Pathfinder 2nd Edition. You don't roll the dice to roll up your character anymore. You don't roll the dice to determine your background anymore. You don't roll the dice to pick your heritage or ancestry or D&D, your race anymore. You just pick it. And you pick your class ahead of time, and then you have some starting statistics and ability scores, and you add to it. So that's something I think that Traveler should have adopted to over time, and hopefully one day there'll be a T6 and it will do that. So it's 43 years later. So this video is going to focus on Just Combat, about the system the way it was released in 1977. And even at that, it is very intelligent, very streamlined systems, way ahead of its time. And with a little bit of customization, it's very compelling and very rich. And it has a lot. And if you put a little bit more love into it, you can really empower your players. So we have 2 main references. If you ever want to get into Traveler, I recommend you get this blue book you see on the right-hand side called The Traveler Book. Now, you could go to eBay and you can get print-on-demand versions of the original 3 books, and you could do that. But I actually think the Traveler Book is probably the best. Now, I personally lost my copy of the Traveler Book a long time ago when I moved years ago. I have a copy of the landscape format reprints from 2000. Those are my books. And that has all the books printed in a landscape format, so you can actually see 4 pages at once. So when you open the book up, it's like a little black book side by side. So it's like an 8.5 by 17 size book. It's ridiculous how huge it is. But when this, so if you want to get into this and you want to check it out, the most economical way to really do that is to go to farfuture.net, which is Mark Miller's website. He's the licensee holder, the copyright holder for the whole Traveler universe and Epoch going on, and all the Game Designer Workshop games. He owns the copyright these things, and there is no open game license. You can't make your own content for this game and sell it. You can make it for free, but you can't sell it. But he will offer to sell you like a CD with everything in it for $35, which is really cheap. You can get like 90 books or 80 books of the original books reprinted in PDF format and on a CD-ROM. That's really, really great. That's a good deal. Now, if you go to Drive-Thru RPG, you're going to kind of pay too much money. You're going to find, print-on-demand oriented, larger, higher resolution copies of those old books, like the Traveler book, and they're going to be like $19, which is what you kind of pay for some of these modern books on sale at Amazon for Pathfinder, and they're not going to be hardback. So if you want to get into Traveler, I recommend buying the CD-ROM from Mark and just live in a PDF world. If you want a hard copy, you can pick one up from someone secondhand, or if you really want to spend the money to get a good definitive book, get the Traveler book. So let's go back in time and do a little bit of history lesson. So Origins, this is like Gen Con or Dragon Con and things like that. 1977, that's when they first released the game on Staten Island, New York. It was a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday convention 2 months after the release of the first Star Wars movie, which is like, episode 4 or something like that. This is a convention that was war game centric. And you'll see a little bit later on the following page, I actually am going to read to you verbatim the glowing review from someone who wrote a write-up after seeing this game and playing it at that convention. And the Traveler designers were in college. I was 12, 13 years old. I was in middle school. So myself and all my friends that got into D&D, basic D&D, original D&D, and advanced Dungeons & Dragons, that was our introduction to role-playing games. And at the same time, we grabbed Traveler. And we also were playing Panzer Leader and Squad Leader and Waterloo and a lot of Avalon Hill, cardboard counter, hex grid style games. And Traveler kind of leaned on that side of things. You played D&D, you had these crazy polyhedral dice The first ones were crappy and would fall apart, and the corners would rub off on you. But Traveler's like using two six-sided dice, so it had this little boxed game Monopoly kind of vibe to it. It didn't quite jump off the shelf as an amazing Tamiya model or an incredible D&D book full of pictures of minotaurs and stuff. So it had this kind of like, there's nothing in here but words, man. And when you're 12 years old, it doesn't feel very compelling. But once we got into it and read the rules, we're like, wow, this is really strong. And over the years since then, in 1993, Traveler the New Era, which is another edition, basically the fourth edition of Traveler, it won the Origins Award for Best Role-Playing Rules. 1993 is still a long time ago. And that's really before D&D third edition. That's probably around the time that D&D is in its second edition, and they're starting to write some Dritz Stewart novels around 1988 is when those started coming out. So the D&D world's in Faerun and doing all that kind of business and writing novel after novel after novel, while Traveler's coming out with a new edition. In 1996, it was inducted into the Origins Hall of Fame, which is quite an accomplishment. So there's the books. We're going to refer to these two books here, Traveler Book 1, Characters and Combat, and we're going to refer to stuff from the Traveler book, and I'll tell you why those two books are really useful. But like I said a few minutes ago, there was a magazine. You can see this crappy 1977 magazine called Moves, and it's from the Origins. It's a pictorial, so if you didn't make it to the convention, you could get this magazine, right? I think it was like a $4 magazine, which is a lot of money back then, but it has about 4 times the cost of a comic book, or even more. And there's a review of Traveler, and on the right-hand side, we see a picture of the back of the box. You can almost see the top of the box folded on top of this black and white, and all this indented text everywhere for Game Designer Workshop. So here's the praise written by Phil Kosnet. In contrast, GDW, that bastion of socialist game design. I don't get that one. I didn't think these guys were a socialist, but anyway, has produced Traveler, the best science fiction role-playing game I've seen, designed by Mark Miller with Lauren Wiseman and John Harshman, Frank Chadwick, who's also a famous game designer, and Daryl Haney, who I'm not sure who those other people are, but Lauren Wiseman, Mark Miller, and Frank Chadwick are well known in the RPG industry. I'm not familiar with John Harshman or Daryl Haney, but it doesn't mean anything. It is complete. It has rules for everything, creating worlds and star maps, equipment, tools, shelter, food, overhead, vehicles, patrons, employees, psionics, a lot of psionics, racial intolerance, character generation, aging, promotion, retirement, personal combat with modern antique weapons, pole axes, very extensive rules for spacecraft construction, outfitting, use, weaponry, computers, equipment, trade, and commerce, and as they say, much, much more. This is a game where the GM works with a solid, logical, workable framework. He doesn't have to come up with his own ideas to fill in all the gaps, though he can always add his own variables. The game is quite simply out brilliant. I defy you to find a major flaw or gap in logic anywhere in the 3 44-page booklets, which you can see in the lower right corner. Book 1, Book 2, and Book 3. Characters in Combat, Starships, Worlds of Adventure. That's what they look like. Those 3 little booklet manuals, about 128 pages of content, is 122 or whatever you want to call it, 132 pages of content inside that little tiny little box to the left. So, it's a great game. It's worth every cent. Even at that time, $12 for 3 booklets in a box seems overpriced. I think the original version of Panzer Leader was $12.95. So it was kind of like, whoa, it's a bigger game, a lot bigger rule book. Just reading is a blast, and while there are a few bits of silliness, like the blade combat and the space pirates, this hokiness is kept to a minimum. In fact, knowing the guys at GDW, they put into more to pacify those who would expect this sort of thing, because they really believe it. You should buy it. So what a great review, right? Pretty honest. We don't have that kind of writing in modern day. So these little saddle stitch booklets is where it all began. Now, let's think about the time. That's 1977. So Traveler has superior depth than the original Dungeons and Dragons, not Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and not Second Edition, and not the stuff that they leaped into huge content wars with all this Faerun stuff and all the novels they wrote. That's when the D&D universe really exploded into a mythology. Greyhawk was like the Gazetteer. That was it. 10, 12 really good modules, disconnected, not really connected except against the Giants in the Drow campaign. And then you go to Faerun, and everyone's a fancy character, and everyone's Lord of the Rings type mode, right? So the original setting is people who were science fiction fans and like science fiction movies who fell in love with Star Wars. This game comes out 2 months later. And prior to that, I grew up when I was in, 4th and 5th grade in love with Star Trek. So I'm in fourth and fifth grade, and my friends and I are watching Star Trek in what's called syndication. So Star Trek comes out in 1966 when I was only 1 year old, had 3 seasons and 79 original series episodes. But then 3 or 4 years later, when I'm like, I don't know, in 1973, it's in syndication. That means it's playing every week at a certain time, and all the different TV channels are playing it, and they're playing their own advertisements, and it's becoming much more popular. And you start having Star Trek conventions, and there's Star Trek T-shirts, and there's phasers, and there's action figures, and there weren't even a few Star Trek games. There was Tamiya models of the Enterprise, and Klingon, Bird of Prey, and Romulan ships, and all that kind of stuff. So Star Trek took off first. It was the first broadband appealing science fiction universe. Phasers were amazing. The fights were great. The conflict was great. Captain Kirk was this machismo hero. They're flying all over the universe. They're going to all these different places. Really fantastic. Prior to that, you had like Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is like a filmmaker on drugs type of film. It has an incredible plot with the HAL 9000, but everything else that surrounds it's a little bizarre in La La Land. If you're a filmmaking student, you probably love it. But there's some very, very nasty, futuristic doomsday themes in the Planet of the Apes movie. And as you could see, in 1968, Planet of the Apes premiered, which with Charlton Heston, damn them all, they blew it all to hell. And then Beneath the Planet of the Apes in 1970, Escape from the Planet of the Apes in 71, and Conquest of the Planet of the Apes in 72, and Battle for the Planet of the Apes in 73. And I remember as a kid when the action figures for all the Cornelius and all the other General, whatever his name was, the baddies in the Planet of the Apes came out. That was a very 60s feeling kind of a science fiction story. And a lot of novels around that time were popular because we just put a man on the moon. The Apollo program was just kicking off. There was a lot of things about space that were becoming, imaginative. People are becoming astronomers. People are doing things with science and using nuclear power. And this is a period in history where technology, we don't quite have computers yet, but in the science fiction they do. So it was really amazing. But like I said earlier, Star Wars premieres on May the 25th of 1977. 2 months later is when Traveler's released. So you have to think to yourself that Traveler's probably inspired not only by all the paperback books that they talked about that they were inspired by, but surely they were big fans of Star Trek. I can imagine if Mark Miller was in college and his buddies were in college in 1978 and they're 22, 23, 24 years old, if you go back in time to when Star Trek came out, they're probably 13 years old. So 10 years prior to that, they're 9, 10-year-olds. So they're seeing Star Trek on TV, probably in black and white or maybe a little bit of color. Depends what kind of TV they have. And for them, they're like, wow, we want to make a world that's like this. And then they have 2001: Space Odyssey and all this Larry Niven and all these science fiction books. And so then when Star Wars comes out, Star Wars has this kind of little, silliness to it. So for them, as adults in college, they're like, well, we want to make a more scientific-oriented kind of a game, something that's hard science fiction. They didn't want to just jump on the lightsaber Princess Leia bandwagon with Wookiees, right? So, but because Star Wars was so popular, suddenly science fiction becomes appealing in a Disney kind of way, which is ironic that ultimately Disney ends up owning Star Wars. For people to get interested in science fiction and blasters and flying in space and battle cruisers and all these wonderful technology and this beautiful concept art done by everyone who created those original films. So that really is where the glue connects. You have this hardcore science fiction designers in a wargaming era taking something they probably grew up with, which is Star Trek, and kind of removing the space opera from it and infusing the NASA into it, and then having Star Wars being released to reinvigorate the excitement and the drama of all these distant worlds and distant races, right? So all these things kind of merge together into this perfect timing release for your hard science fiction game, just in time for Space 1999 to come out like a month or two later. So Space 1999 was a very gritty science fiction where these folks are on Moonbase Alpha and there's a nuclear explosion where mankind's been storing all this nuclear materials on the far side of the moon, and it propels the moon out of orbit and it goes off into deep space and goes through black holes and ends up traveling across the universe. It's the typical we're lost and can't find our way home. So this is the context. This is the time frame. There's no internet. This there's only Starlog magazine and maybe Cinema Fantastique magazine. You're a little kid, you ride your bicycle up to the little store, you're buying a copy of Savage Sword or Conan the Barbarian or a copy of GI Combat or Sergeant Rock. You're buying lollipops and Fun Dip, and you're spending your $2 a week allowance, and you see these magazines. There's National Lampoon, which you can't look at, and they're really bad magazines are hidden behind the counter. And then you got this one thing called Starlog, and it even has the font that kind of looks like Star Trek. And you open it up, and there's colored pictures of Spock and Kirk fighting, and there's pictures of the X-wing flying with the wings opening. You're like, wow, this is awesome. So your imagination is captured. So if you're ever interested in science and the stars, this is where it truly, truly begins. Now, after all that preface, let's look at the rules of Traveler, just focusing on combat. And let's read the quote here. A basic throw of 8+ is required in every case to obtain a hit, such throw being subject to die modification for considerations such as range between the two parties, attacker and defender expertise, the type of weapon used, surprise, and other factors. If a hit is obtained, wounds are inflicted based on the type of weapon which made the hit. Each combat round lasts 15 seconds, so there's only 4 of them in a minute. Combat continues until one party is vanquished. And there's a little picture to my 2 favorite Black Pearl dice I use and my original copy of my book here that shows right written in it with a combat round 15 seconds, which I object to. But is it really a basic throw to hit? So you're throwing 2 6-sided dice, and if you roll an 8 or higher, that's the base number. Now your target number is going to change. It's going to go up or go down, becoming harder to hit if the number goes up and become easier to hit if the target goes down. So once you hit, you do damage. So it's kind of like a D&D does the same thing. You roll to hit against an armor class, and if you hit, you roll damage. So there's something I want to talk about later on this video. There's a way to take that basic roll to hit and kind of allow the mitigation to exist on its own, because in reality, no, it's not a basic throw to hit. It's actually a roll to hit and deliver effective damage, and we're going to expand on that later. So if we don't hit the target number, we often say, you miss, right? But in all actuality, you could have hit the target, but you didn't do any damage. And that could be because of the type of armor and protection that they have in the relationship between that and whether you're using a 9mm pistol or a laser carbine or a rail gun or something like that. So think of it this way. When you have a target number, the number you need to match or beat on 2d6 to hit the target and deliver effective, life-threatening damage with the potential to actually incapacitate or even kill. Right? So in Traveler, we roll 2d6 and must roll higher than the target number. This is similar to most war games that use 6-sided dice and role-playing games that use a d20, like I mentioned. For example, in Pathfinder 2nd Edition and in AD&D, we have to roll to beat the target's armor class, right? Games like Boot Hill and Top Secret explored the use of percentile dice, where the target number is a percentage chance expressed in relatable terms where we roll under the target number. So Advanced Dungeons & Dragons use this for thief abilities like Hide in Shadows and Open Locks. So if you have a 64% chance to hit J.D. Hollister with your fast draw revolver, which comes from Boot Hill, 64% chance to disable an alarm system like in Top Secret, it's easy to understand there's also a 64% chance of rain. If you roll a 66, it's not going to rain. So if you look at modern miniature war games like Warhammer 40K, Warhammer Fantasy, this is called Age of Sigmar now, Hail Caesar, Pike and Shot, Black Powder, Bolt Action, which are all the Warlord games, we see the pretty standard Rick Priestley, Alessio Cavatore style rules that use simple 6-sided dice throws, hitting a target number with die modifiers, reducing your chance to hit. So wounding in war games, though, is much simpler. You hit someone, they're probably dead. You don't roll a lot of damage and the character's still alive and running around. The German soldier's probably just dead in one hit. Because they're much more combat about multiple units, multiple squads. There might be 48 to 64 units on the battlefield on a 4x8 table. Now with a role-playing game, it's a little bit more about the heroism of the individual character. The characters are killed in the first combat encounter by the first shot. But in Traveler, that can actually happen. It's rare to have it happen to anyone in D&D except at low levels. But once you hit level 4 in D&D, you don't usually die in one melee round. It's very, very rare for that to happen. Let's keep going. So what actually modifies this basic throw to hit? Well, there's multiple factors that modify your chance to score, once again, effective damage, and we'll discuss the main ones in this video. So one's called weapon expertise, or just expertise, which is really how good you are with your weapon. So it depends whether you're doing a melee attack or like this guy on the right going to shoot his semi-automatic rifle, right? So if you have expertise with a weapon, you're better at hitting things, so you get a bonus to your roll. If you're better using a cutlass or a saber or a lightsaber or anything like that, you have a bonus to your roll. So it's like having a magic sword in D&D. You have a +1 magic sword, you roll a d20, it's a 19, you add 1, it's a 20. So then there's a weapon to armor relationship called a matrix. Now this is where we figure out damage mitigation. So unlike D&D, where they don't really differentiate too much between chainmail and plate mail and leather and studded except by a number. Now there are tables in AD&D to do that, but most people don't use them. They pay heavy attention to what kind of weapon does what kind of damage to what kind of armor. Certain kind of armor is fantastic for resisting laser damage, whereas other types of armor are absolutely terrible at it and will actually amplify the damage, making you easier to hit. Now, this is one thing that's very interesting. They roll the damage and the chance to hit all into this armor and weapon relationship. So it becomes easier to hit someone because remember, it's not just a hit. It's a hit and deliver effective damage. It's combined. So the other factors that affect this is evading target. So example, if you're trying to shoot or hit someone with your sword and the enemy says, I'm trying to evade, they can't attack. They're completely on the defensive. That may be running away and zigzagging or holding the sword and backing up and just defending. In that situation, they give you a die modifier. And if you see this chart to the right, which is taken from the Traveler book from 1982, I highlighted in yellow the kind of die modifiers we're going to talk about today. We're not going to talk about things like drawing weapons or weaken blows or throwing blades or poor vision or group hits with shotguns or any of that kind of detail crap. We're just going to talk about the basics here, like the advantages you get due to your dexterity or strength, whether it's melee or whether it's a gunfight. We're going to talk about the attacker weapon skill, which is called expertise, and the defender skill and the armor and the range and generally evading and cover. So we're going to talk about those things with step-by-step instructions. Now, you do see here that the Traveler book is an updated version of the original Little Black books. It does a much better job of collecting all the charts and creating a list of how to do this and how to determine a roll to hit in order, because in the original books, it's all kind of buried in the paragraph. So if you don't have to go glean out from the paragraph like I've done in this video, I highly recommend you get a copy of that. So what is expertise? So there's 4 major categories, and think of it as skill, right? There's brawling, which is punching, kicking, jiu-jitsu, striking, kickboxing, wrestling, no unarmed combat, basically. Then there's blade combat, which is basically melee weapons. Doesn't necessarily mean you're using a blade. You could be using a cudgel or a mace or a flail or a lightsaber or a sword or a scimitar or a polearm or a spear, right? And then you have gun combat, which is using any kind of weapon of any technology level, all the way up to blaster, rail guns, laser rifles. And you'll see that the type of weapons that they list here for skills, they're very rudimentary. They break them down into weapon types, like semi-automatic pistol, but they don't break it down into one model versus another model versus another model. You don't have the same kind of breakdown like you might have in a World War II game. So this is basically how it works. So you write the skill name followed by a dash and a number. So in the case of blade combat or gun combat, the character must immediately choose a weapon within a category of specific weapon of expertise. So what that means is, like, if you're rolling your character up and it says you gain a point in blade combat, you got to pick which weapon. You never actually have written on your character sheet that I'm blade combat 3, I'm brawling 2, or I'm gun combat 4. Well, you might put brawling 2, but you would never put gun combat 4. You would pick a weapon. So you might be like, I'm good at automatic shotgun, or I'm good at semi-automatic pistols, or rifles, bolt-action rifles, semi-automatic rifles. You create a cascade skill, if you want to use a Mega Traveler term. So the attacker's expertise gives a bonus to their attack roll with a 1 point per rank ratio. So every rank you have is +1 to hit, basically. And we're not going to talk about gunnery. That's using artillery and turrets like Luke Skywalker and Han Solo and stuff. So you gain a bonus to your 2d6 roll. And remember, there's only from 2 to 12, there's only 10 digits you can roll, right? +1 is a pretty decent amount. So when you try to match and beat a basic roll to hit, that +1 is going to make a big difference. So if you have 3 in a skill, which is pretty decent, okay, probably 12 years of investment in your life to get there, that's a big impact on a 2d6 roll. If you need to hit 10 to hit somebody, you only roll a 7, you got +3 for your skill that you're going to land a hit. And here's an example. An attacker with broadsword -2, which really means, just think of it as level 2, or broadsword 2, attacks a defender with cutlass 4, which is incredible. Ignoring all other modifiers, what would normally be a required throw of 8+, means 8 equal to or higher, now becomes 10 or higher. If the defender had no melee weapon equipped, the attacker would only need a natural roll of 6 to hit. In this specific situation, the referee should use logic and judgment, especially for melee weapons. A cutlass and a broadsword are not completely identical weapons, but each use the same defensive techniques for parrying, deflecting, and diverting incoming blows. So on the other hand, a defender using a dagger, right, may not have much of a chance of a defensive bonus against a guy with a polearm or broadsword. I mean, I don't really foresee someone parrying a pike attack with a little dagger or a little bayonet. So even though blade combat is an expertise heading, some of these cascade expertises beneath it, think of them subheadings, don't always function as a defense against each other. So common sense prevails. The rules aren't bloated in word count. They don't go off on a large tangent. Less word count than even I put here, right? That level of detail is not discussed in the rules, and in this case, it grants the referee the ability to add and expand the rules as they see fit to facilitate the fun. So like in AD&D, not everything is covered. It's not like a 55,000 page book. In Traveler 5, maybe a little too much. So expertise notation. Since the expertise notation is a single digit whole number, like automatic rifle 1 or automatic rifle 2 or automatic rifle 3, each number represents a bonus to your dice roll. Another way of thinking about expertise is rank or level, which you heard me mention a moment ago. One might say their character is a level 3 in automatic rifle if it makes it easier to talk about, since we're using, it's been 40 years of game lingo. So in addition to the level of rank expertise, if the defender has a skill that counters this, okay, like sword 2, and similar type of blade weapon, it makes them harder to hit, which their expertise value kind of implies a defensive ability with it as well. So in our example we were saying earlier, you may see from the previous slide here, one guy had cutlass 4, one guy had broadsword 2. So if the guy was just standing there not doing anything, we're just trying to evade a little bit, well, maybe not even evading, didn't even realize I was there, and I tried to hit him, I only need a 6 to hit him. But since he's defending, his 4 adds to my 6, making my target number higher. See how that works? It's very simple math. It's not complicated at all. So let's take a look down here below with our crazy automatic rifle from Wolfenstein, right? So the basic throw to hit is 8. If a shooter has an expertise automatic rifle 3, and we ignored all of the modifiers in this example, you only need to roll a 5 or higher to hit the target, because the bonus to the 2d6 roll gets plus to 3. So when you look in the original rule books, here's your list of skills, which are called expertise. They have no actives, right? There's no special ability you can activate. There's no passives. There's no special bonuses. You're not picking any perks. They're not like flagrant reloader or bloody mess or anything like that. It's just a basic skill. It implies you know how to do all these things, right? But there isn't a bunch of bogged down details with like, well, I have spot, check, and all these kind of things you see that were added to D&D later on. So for gun combat, then it goes even higher. Body pistol. That's like a personal, small little weapon, plastic maybe that you've hidden in your purse as a woman or stuffed in your pocket as a guy. It's a concealed weapon, very small concealed weapon. Automatic pistol or semi-automatic pistol is like a Glock, right? Revolver, carbine. You can think of a carbine for World War II, rifle, bolt action or semi-automatic, automatic rifle, shotgun, submachine guns, laser carbine, laser rifles. Now notice they don't say blasters and bolters and all these other weapons, and fusion weapons and rail guns. Well, you would have to add that to the game yourself, because when this came out in 1977, some of those words like rail gun didn't even exist. And we go to blade combat, they just pick some rudimentary ones too. Daggers, blades, foils, sword, cutlass, broadsword, bayonet, spear, and halberd. It's kind of like what you would see in Dune. What's so funny about this is there's weapons in Star Trek like phasers and phasers set to stun and sonic weapons, and they don't even include that. So they just decided just to put lasers in here. Now, in their universe, they kind of stick to that. You don't really see a lot of additional supplements released that and include this massive array of incredible weapons, not by Game Designer Workshop, in fact. So it's okay for you to add to these things, but there is a relationship between the weapon and the damage it does versus the armor. So you need to take that in consideration if you embellish the game with your own weapons. So there's another factor we mentioned that affects your chance to hit, and it's called advantageous dexterity and strength. So you get a bonus to hit if you meet that criteria, okay? And the rules as written say this right here. For strength, it only affects your melee attacks. So the efficiency of various blows and swings, not shots, is dependent upon personal strength. So you look at this table on the right, and let's say we're trying to make an attack with a foil, right? Let's just highlight this here I'll hold my mouse cursor over it, right? Foil. So in order I have to have at least a strength of 5 to wield it. If I don't, I have a penalty of -1 when I try to hit anything. or deal effective damage. But if I've got a strength of 10, I get a bonus of +1 to hit something. Now, if I'm exhausted later on in fights, I get a penalty of, in this case, it's -2. And we won't talk about weakened blows in this video. It's something you can read up about. It's when, after you've expended all your endurance, you're just totally gassed out like an MMA fighter, you have weakened blows, makes it harder for you to hit things, which makes fight take longer. Now, the same thing happens for dexterity. If you look down here below, let's just take a look at an automatic rifle. It requires a dexterity of 7 to use effectively. If you only had a dexterity of 6, and character attributes are from 2d6, and during the character creation process, you might get some characteristics as high as 15. They use hexadecimal. So everything above 9 is A, B, C, D, E, right? So even F. So you never say you have 11 strength. You would say you have, B or something like that. So dexterity in this case, if you don't have enough dexterity, you have a penalty. So let's just take a look here at rifle, which we're going to see an example later on. If you have a dexterity of 8, you get a +1 to hit, right? And you even have a maximum effective range value to deal with. So that's very interesting because you start seeing the relationship between your statistics, your ability scores, and how good you're going to be at using certain weapons. So you might want to pick weapons that really give you a bonus. If you're a high dexterity character, you might get a fantastic bonus to hit with something like a submachine gun or a laser carbine, which gives you +2, etc. So that's something to think about as well. That's a subtlety to the system that isn't really taken advantage of in other games. You may have things like in dexterity and D&D, you get an armor class bonus. You get a bonus to initiative, but you don't get a bonus to hit unless you're a finesse weapon or something like that. So let's go to the next factor, range. So Traveler has a funky range system. They only have 5 primary ranges for personal combat, which means fighting between characters. And they use meters as a unit of measurement. And for non-military or non-United States-based players, comprehending those values is a little bit more difficult. But in the rules, here's what they are. Close is the first one. It means physical contact, touching, arm's length. Short, at sword or pole arm point, 1 to 5 meters, not feet, meters. Medium, at pistol range, 6 to 50 meters, which I would dare say is a lot longer than pistol range. Long is rifle range, 51 to 250 meters, which is really far, and very long is extreme. You're talking sniper scope action, 251 to 500 meters. Now, this only applies to using, firearms or bows and arrows and crossbows or melee weapons. Now, if you change all these meters into imperial units, like English units, a sword and pole arm point means 3 to 15 feet. Medium is considered pistol range, 15 to 164 feet. As you can see, this is from 5 to 55 yards, over half the length of an American football field. That's pretty far. If you're in the end zone and you're trying to hit someone at the 50-yard line who's standing there motionless with a pistol, I bet you miss. Now, you and I aren't super pistol shooters and we aren't trained Traveler characters, but even if we were, it would be very difficult to hit that target. It's a very small target to hit. This is one of the weaknesses, I think, of the game, is it doesn't break the medium skill range into smaller subsets. But it probably tried to counter that by making the penalties different, but the penalties aren't really that big. So almost all gun combat in the game is going to pretty much occur at medium range. So if you look over here on the right-hand side, we do a little analysis, right? If you want to get a pistol rating for the National Rifle Association or something like that, I've done pistol competitions at 25 feet before with wad cutters, which is a type of bullet that doesn't have a rounded end, it's just a little flat slug, hitting targets, not people. That's 25 feet. So in competitions, you have 15 to 30 feet. Well, that's going to be basically medium range, and an automatic pistol is already at -4 to hit at medium range. Long range is only -6. So imagine this, trying to hit someone 100 yards away, right? Long range is 820 feet, which is 2.7 American football field lengths. And with the automatic pistol, you only have -6 to hit. This doesn't sound, and if you have +3 on skill, that means it's only -3. So it's a little bit on the wonky side. That means that the range values, they have some effect on combat, but they're very forgiving. They are assumed that when you get ready to pull up to shoot, maybe they're implying that you shot a number of times over that 15 seconds, and that one good solid shot, the one you're throwing the throw of the dice for, is the best shot of many during that round, right? So this is something to take in consideration. For example, Let's look at a Beretta 9.2F semi-automatic pistol. You fire this weapon anywhere between 16 to 164 feet, you only have a -4 modifier. Range is critical for firearm effectiveness. Weapons, in my opinion, are actually too lenient in their accuracy modifiers in the game in its base form. This may lead to more absurd hits, and which unfortunately then may leads to high level lethality, which can be game ending. Because in Traveler, the characters don't gain hit points, they don't gain levels. The amount of health you have out of the gate is based on your strength, your dexterity, and your endurance. As individual statistics. Wounds are applied to it, and we'll talk about wounds in this video too. So it's something to think about. Now, don't change it. Leave it like it is. I think you can leave it just like it is because I've offered some suggestions on how to make it feel a little bit cleaner a little later on in the video. So another thing that affects things is the damage, right? So let's take a look at this weapon matrix here. This is where we compare the defender's armor across the top, which is broken down into very abstract terms like nothing, a jack or mesh, cloth, reflect, ablat, and battle armor. Ablat is kind of like this weird armor they created that has like a reflective surface but very light, kind of like you might see in one of the Star Trek episodes. I think it's a type of armor that like decays when it gets shot. It like tears open. A reflect reflects laser fire. Cloth is basically like a ballistic jacket, like a bulletproof vest. So as you see these relationships, like if you hit someone with an automatic pistol and they're wearing cloth, right? Your chance to hit someone with an automatic pistol, and if they're wearing cloth, which also means your chance to deliver effective damage, is reduced by -3. So that's pretty crazy. So let's take a look at this. On the right-hand side, I pulled out a few examples, right? Let's just say we're all trying to hit someone in a bulletproof vest, and we have a dagger. So your chance to hit and deliver effective damage is reduced by 4 on 2d6. Okay, the average number on 2d6 is 7. So that means you need to roll an 11 on average to hit that. And normally you need an 8, right? So this will add 4 to give you a 12. Hopefully you have skill to start bringing that number down. Sword, -3. Automatic pistol was like a Glock or something, or the weapon we mentioned earlier, a Beretta, -3. Rifle, -2. Automatic rifle, -1. And laser carbine gives you a bonus, actually, against that type of armor. So the above values are die modifiers to the hit roll, but as we might expect, it's harder for a dagger and a sword to penetrate a bulletproof vest. But as we move up the chain of ballistic weapons for an automatic pistol to rifle, automatic rifle, we see real-world sensibilities are in line with our expectations. So instead of reducing damage from wounds that hit, Classic Traveler simply reduces your chance to hit, period. So this is something I want to talk about later on. I've hinted on it about 6 times now. We'll get to it eventually. So let's start combining the two factors. Let's look at the range matrix again and add in the distance that we were talking about and the armor. So you can see how those two modifiers themselves, the type of armor your target's wearing and how far away they are, how they can add up quickly. All right. So below we have the attacker's weapon, an automatic pistol. Remember, cloth is a ballistic jacket. So you already got a -3 chance to hit by hitting someone with a ballistic jacket, and you have -4 because you're at medium range. That means a total negative chance to hit is -7. So if you needed an 8 to hit someone, right, and you roll a 12, you miss. Okay, so you're going to need other positives to make up for that -6. And you may say, well, that sounds like that sucks. I'll miss all the time. Well, you need to do things you can do to change the situation. You can move closer. You can have better skill. You can make sure you're not using a bad weapon against a different type of armor that's hard to hit, etc. So then we look at the rifle. Now, a rifle has no problems really hitting cloth. It's only -2. There's no penalty for the range. So using a rifle is a better chance of hitting and delivering effective damage than a pistol at 55 yards, right? Automatic rifle, you get a bonus for the range. It gives you, actually that added there is incorrect. It should be just +1. Laser carbine is +1 to hit cloth and +1 for range, so a bonus of +2. So that's something to keep in mind. So there's a relationship between how far away something is, how effective that weapon is at that range band, and how effective that weapon is at penetrating that armor. How well does it mitigate that type of damage? And all that is rolled up into one basic roll. And the thing that's going to life or death save you and make you successful is your skill, your positioning, and where you are. So you may need to close range. You may want to use cover so you don't get hit while you're shooting. You may want to make sure you're using a different weapon. It's not a game where you can only specialize in submachine gun, right? You may want to pick up a shotgun. So there may be certain situations when you're fighting different types of enemies with different types of armor, you bring the right weapon to the gunfight, right? Now let's talk about another rule that affects our base roll to hit, which is called evasion. It's a very simple rule. It basically means if someone's attempting to evade enemy attacks and they are not attacking at all, and they do not attack, there's a different modifier added based upon how far away they are when they say they're evading. So if I'm right in front of you and I'm saying I'm trying to evade your blow with a a battle axe or something, I get a -1. You get a -1 to hit me. Now, if I'm running across a football field and I'm at medium range, I'm trying to avoid being shot, and you're trying to hit me, you get -2. So you can imagine if you add that to the left here, the automatic pistol, -3 to hit my ballistic jacket, -4 because I'm at medium range, and I could be running around like a nutter, right? That's another -2. That total sum modifier could be -9. I could make myself almost literally impossible to hit by evading and wearing that right kind of armor. So you can see other values there below. Let's move on. So, summary. As we can see, the basic throw to hit is really a roll with rules as written to hit and deliver effective damage. So you can imagine there's a lot of misses going on. At medium range and out, a lot of gun combat is flat out missing unless someone uses the right weapon for the right job. And when they do use the right weapon for the right job and they do close range, they're going to have to use cover, and they're going to have to understand when to evade and when to move. So that's very, very important, because you won't be able to change your weapon expertise in the field. You're going to need to plan which weapon to use to take advantage of your advantageous strength or dexterity. You're going to need to start the engagement at a range that works for you at a disadvantage to your enemy, kind of like playing chess. Don't take your pawn up against the bishop. The weapon and armor relationship, you need to truly understand it and be able to visually recognize what your opponent is wearing and what weapon do you have that's going to be best at penetrating that, because you will miss otherwise. And if someone's coming after you and you're in a bad situation, you need to use evasion and cover to make sure you protect yourself. That in of itself are actions. So instead of saying going prone like you do in a shooter, or hiding behind a wall and leaning out and taking cover, all these things mean you need to do things with your characters to change the tide of the battle, make smart decisions about what to use. Don't just show up with your broadsword and start swinging. You're going to get killed. All right, so every single one of these modifiers is in your hands. They can choose weapons knowing what range they're most effective at for the situation, have added bonuses. Over time, you can focus on improving expertise in those weapons. Even though it's a very long process, it's still worth doing. Once you find your style with your character, you may, you know what, I'm going to increase my carbine skill. I love this weapon. It's brilliant for what we do when we're pirating ships and kicking in bulkheads, right? So the choices about the armor are important. That's something you can just purchase and buy. You can have a little bit of skill in the armor and open up the door for wearing lots of different armor. So let's take a look here. I got an example here, 2 ways. Rules as written and one with a house rule. Let's take 2 soldiers from the supplement. Supplement number 1, 1001 characters. In 1978, when this was released, 2 soldiers fire at the exact same rifle, pretty much, a bolt-action rifle, at each other, and there's no surprise. Neither soldier is evading. Both are wearing ballistic vest, considered as cloth armor. They're both 40 yards apart, which is 120 feet, which is plus or minus 36 meters, which is medium range. The first one, we'll call him a captain. He's got a UPP and Universal Personal Profile of 7A87B5. He's 22 years old. He served 1 term in the military. He has a rank of 4 in tactics, a skill of 1 in rifle and 1 in submachine gun. Let's say he's using like a British Lee Enfield Mark 1 number 4 303 bolt action rifle like you'd have in the British 8th Army and El Alamein, right? He's taking a shot at a trooper who's got kind of bad statistics for his dexterity and endurance, but he's got a lot of strength. So he's a big thug, right? 8 strength, 4 dexterity, 4 endurance, 3, and then A, and then 4. So we'll talk about the UPP profiles later. So his statistics, he's a real interesting character. 1 skill on daggers, 1 skill on tactics, and he's got a skill on rifle too. So he has the same skill on rifle that you do. He's wearing cloth armor. He's also using a bolt-action rifle. Maybe his is like the CX Bolt 375 Holland and Holland Magnum that you can buy today, right? So let's add up the modifiers. For the captain, he's got +1 to hit from his rifle 1 skill. He's got +1 for his advantageous dexterity, which is it's up above. You see 7, 8, 8. The second one is his dexterity. So he gets +1 to hit for his advantageous dexterity using a rifle. The range has no effect on rifles. It's -3 for him to hit against cloth due to the weapon matrix. The total modifiers is -1. That means when he rolls 2d6, he needs a natural 9 to hit and damage. Okay? Now let's look at the trooper's modifiers. He's got +1 to hit for his expertise in rifle, but his dexterity is low. He's got this crappy 4 dexterity, which is below the required 6 minimum to effectively use a rifle. So he gets -2 to hit. There's no modifier again for range because they're both at the same distance. And he also gets -3 to hit because the rifle is against ballistic armor, which is called cloth. His total modifiers is -4. So he needs a natural 12 to hit and damage. So you can see that's pretty nasty, right? So the -3, -2 is -5, +1 is 4. He would normally need an 8 to hit. You have to add 4 to that to give him a 12. Our total modifier for our captain is +2 and then -3, so it's only -1. So he only needs to hit a 9 or higher. So the modifiers are very different. A -1 versus a -4 is a big difference. He would have to roll 2 6-sided dice, the trooper would, both 6s, to hit his opponent at this range. I think the odds are that the captain's going to win that gunfight, right? But it doesn't mean he needs to stay that way. Now, when we combine all these, we see that trooper has a very low chance of hitting and damaging his target, and almost unfairly so. While the captain only needs a natural 9, odds of the trooper's compound to negative modifiers probably because of his lower dexterity. You need to know that when you're creating your character. Now let's go. We're getting close to our climax. 2 slides left. Now think about this to hit and damage roll. I have a house rule. I separate out the to hit and the damage roll. Very simple. I change nothing else. I have 2 rolls. I have a roll to hit, and then I have a roll to damage. I still use the 8+ base number. I still use the charts. I still use the weapon modifiers. I don't do anything else, but first I make a roll to hit. So once we do a hit, then we roll to see if we do damage. Here's how it works. Same modifiers, same 2 people, trooper versus captain, same weapons, same range. So the modifiers are different. So for the captain, we use +1 for his rifle, +1 for his advantageous dexterity. The range doesn't make any difference. A total modifier +2. The captain only needs a natural 6 to hit. That's a pretty good chance to hit. That's below the average on 2d6. He's going to hit pretty frequently, but will he do damage? Let's see, because we're only going to compare rifle against cloth. No other modifiers affect this. Cloth armor sitting on a stand, a rifle sitting in a vice grip, firing at cloth armor at that distance has nothing to do with the skill of the individual shooter. It is a physical relationship of feet per second for the bullet, the ballistic power of the bullet going through the vest. It has nothing to do with anything else. That's why I want to separate the 2 things out. We're talking about material physics here, right? So in this case, he needs to roll a natural 11 to actually do damage. That means he can hit his target and burn ammo and maybe even bounce his target around a little bit and maybe even damage the opponent's armor. But to hit him and do damage, he's got to roll pretty high. That's why the ballistic armor is so powerful. Even the scrubby lug nut guy, the strong trooper who's a dummy, right, has crappy dexterity, he still can keep himself alive by wearing good armor. That empowers everyone in the game to have a chance to survive through situations where they're not equipped and not in the right position and maybe even flat-footed. If you're willing to get the right kind of armor, you'll probably live through the fight. Let's take a look at the trooper's modifiers. He's got +1 to hit with his expertise with the rifle, but there's -2 because his dexterity was low, right? Rifle requires 6. He only has 4, so he's -2. The range is a wash. It's medium range. There's no penalty for using a rifle at medium range. His total modifier is -1. He only needs a natural 9 to hit. So yes, the captain does have a better chance to hit, but compare that to what we had before. If we look at our previous slide, what did he need to hit before? A natural 12. What do we need to hit before with the captain? A natural 9. With this house rule, the captain can hit a little bit better. He needs a natural 6, right around the midway point. But his to do damage is 11. To do damage against the trooper doing damage, he needs 11. So the damage is really purely a relationship between the weapon and the armor worn. So let's talk about this and summarize. So in this situation, expertise and the characteristics have a great impact on success, and equipment becomes unified and consistent. Combat becomes a contest of ability, talent, and tactics. Tactics now become a player action as opposed to mathematical variables for convenience, which create a situation where characters want to avoid combat because the dice odds are so against them that the risk of death is too high. If you are playing this trooper character, and an enemy captain, pirate captain, comes after you, and you start seeing that you need to roll a 12 to hit this guy, you are not going to fight. Okay? You're going to disengage. Why are you disengaging? Because he's wearing ballistic armor? But you have the skills it takes to win the fight. Maybe you'll get lucky. Where's the tension? Where's the excitement? Both of you are equalized by getting your chance to hit. So that's where we get the tension. That's where the excitement can come in. So by separating the 2-hit and the damage roll, both the Captain Trooper have an equalized chance to break through each other's protective armor with their rifles and inflict meaningful and lethal damage. Hits are happening, so players want to maximize the number of hits they can achieve and reduce the enemy's chances to hit. That's a positive motivator to use evasion or to seek cover and change distances like range. So let's go to our very last page here. Player choice empowers tactical role-playing. That sounds like a dissertation, doesn't it? Another element to this approach that I'm pitching here is the considerations. Now the weapon matrix becomes this rock, paper, scissors relationship like it was intended to be. The player character might choose an all-around appropriate armor and carry a primary weapon and maybe a flexible sidearm or another armor type. This leads back to player choice about expertise. To be effective, characters want the ability to build characters with meaningful expertise choices as opposed to being at the mercy of the military branch's random number generator, which in essence is one of the weaker elements of the game noted earlier on, and I'll discuss that in another video with another set of slides about how to make character creation more compelling. So player choice empowers tactical role-playing. The choice the player make for their characters have greater meaning and impact on combat, increases the tension, shifts the fun away from the chart and into the choices about what you decide to do. For example, do I recognize the enemy target's armor and weapon and understand the threat? In World War II, understanding the weapon of the enemy had a direct impact on squad movement and tactics. In some situations, the United States Marine Corps guides in the South Pacific using a Garand M1 rifle, it has a recognizable ting sound when the magazine's empty. They would fake that sound to get Japanese soldiers to charge them, and then they would shoot them because they'd have another round in the chamber, or they would fake the sound effect by pinging it on the side of their weapon. There's videos with guys who lived through World War II, they maybe passed away today, who would talk about how they would learn to do this trick and it worked every time. Another question a player might ask himself, do I understand how the current distance and range has an effect on my success based on what weapon I use versus what weapon my adversary is using? Do I see an adversary at midfield with a pistol? And do I have a rifle? Maybe I should go for it. If he's got a rifle and I got a pistol, maybe I need to get behind cover and switch weapons. The same thing you would do in a first-person shooter. And here's another question you ask yourself. Do I understand that I can move, seek cover, minimize the chances of being hit from an adversary with a more powerful weapon in greater numbers? And another question. Is this a fight I can win? What are my odds of defeating my enemy with minimal risk? With these basic modifiers that we talked about here from the story, from the rules as written, versus the ones I've talked about here by separating out, even if you use the rules as written, right? You understand if you're playing the trooper, you're at a big disadvantage here. So that's why the player decision making really makes a difference. That's why I feel this role-playing game system is absolutely brilliant if you really dig into it and really give it a chance. So what's my best action right now? Should I attack? Should I move? Change weapons? Seek cover? Have you ever played D&D or Pathfinder with some fun friends who are kind of casuals and they're just like, I attack that guy. And there's no thinking at all. It's just like, I got a lot of hit points. I got someone next to me that can heal me. I got a magical sword. I'm going to cast magic missile. It always does 25 damage. I'm going to cast fireball. The mistakes that happen in D&D games is like someone nuked their friend. The mistake that happens in D&D games is they roll crappy rolls all the time. They feel like, I rolled crappy rolls. That's why I'm dead. Whereas this situation, you're playing something that feels gritty like hard science fiction. So that is what the spirit of Traveller is all about. It's not a space opera. It's not supposed to be Star Wars. It's not supposed to be comical. It's not a fantasy game. It gives you a rule set for creating very gritty combat. That's why I think they did games like Twilight 2000 and some other offshoots of Traveller as well, and Snapshot, which is much more of a gun combat oriented board game. And this is me. This is where I come from. I'm a video game designer. If you've been on my channel before, you've probably seen it before. And I do a lot of evangelizing like this for AD&D and for Pathfinder and massively multiplayer games. And now we're doing this series for Traveller because it's a brilliant game. And I hope you take a chance on it one day and dig into it. So this has been a long video. Be sure to check the timestamps in the pinned comment. It'll let you know where we can go to particular sections in the video. And we'll talk to you soon. And if you play this game, be sure to have a lot of fun because it has so much depth. There are modules, adventures, NPCs, story seeds, deck plans, massive universe with thousands and thousands and thousands of worlds, tons of content out there. A lot of content out there free created by players. And if you really want to do something cool and leap to the stars, I love to recommend this game to anyone who loves role-playing games. This is Classic DM. We'll talk to you later. See ya.